So let's go ahead and get started. It's a little bit after 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. your time in the UK. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the kickoff, which is a global executive search webinar on trends, issues, and things disrupting the executive search industry. My name is Thaddeus Andres. I'm here with Clockwork Recruiting. We build software for executive search firms based upon the 8 stages of executive search and the entire search process. And with me today is Rob Green from Rectec. Rob is joining us graciously from the UK. It is his almost weekend. So Rob, I'll let you talk a little bit about yourself, Rectec, what you guys do, and then I'll kind of go over what we're going to be talking about today for the webinar.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And firstly, what's a weekend? Founders don't get weekends today.
Perks of owning your and running your own business is there is no downtime. There's never a free moment. Yeah.
So I'm Rob Green. I'm the founder and CEO of Rectec. As an organization, we empower recruiters and talent acquisition leaders to make smarter decisions about the tech they use. I don't know where the time has gone, but I have been in the industry for nearly 20 years. And in that time, I've held roles across recruitment agency, RPO, talent acquisition. I spent over 5 years with a software vendor as well, providing an ATS to the industry. And in 2019, I founded a company called Rectec with the objective of helping recruiters and talent acquisition leaders to have a much better experience when they buy technology. It's one of those things where a lot of people don't know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gained a lot of experience working in roles around technology and technology implementation. I've learned a huge amount about this industry. I've managed well over 100 ATS implementation projects, and I've helped customers in 28 countries so far, over 800 customers, to find the right tech for their needs. And we do that using our tool called Rectec Compare, which essentially allows all of those organizations to input their detailed business requirements, and it automatically shortlist the best matching vendors in the market like clockwork. Thank you for the partnership, Thaddeus.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the reason why I've kind of asked Rob to join me today is he comes at it from a complete technical, overarching, sees and experiences and works with a lot of executive search and recruitment platforms out there. So Rob has a lot of kind of the overarching technical feature view, insight into that, whereas we have kind of the executive search side and kind of bring that forward into this conversation around artificial intelligence, automation, ChatGPT, everything like that. So today, again, our topic we're talking about is artificial intelligence and executive search. What does it mean? Where are we going? There's been a lot of kind of, I don't want to say uncertainty or frenzy or kind of chaotic energy around AI and recruitment, but it does seem to be one of those things that people are both curious and also a little bit worried about. One example I can think of in the past is when LinkedIn kind of first came around back in the late 2000s. There was kind of this whole panic of, my black book, my ATS, my candidate database is now open for everyone to search for candidates, that kind of thing. And again, LinkedIn, while it disrupted the industry, it hasn't really changed the industry that much. It's used as a huge sourcing tool for executive search, executive recruiters, but at the end of the day, clients still need the expertise of recruiting firms, executive search firms, to run a search start to finish in a seamless process. So that being said, today my guest is Rob Green, Rectec, and we're talking about AI and executive search. And the conversation format for this webinar specifically is going to be a little bit different. Today is a conversation between the three of us, me, Rob, and you joining us. So if you have any questions around AI, something that we touch upon during our conversation, feel free to drop it in the Q&A chat at the very bottom of your screen, and we'll get to questions at the end of today's session. But before we get to questions, let's kick it off. And Rob, question number 1 for you. And let me go ahead and just stop this so it's just the two of us. Thinking about executive search and recruitment in general, and kind of where AI has come and evolved in the last couple of years, how have you seen AI implemented and used in recruitment across kind of all of those platforms that you have insight into?
I think it's a really exciting time in the recruitment industry right now. I think we're seeing technology evolving really, really quickly. And I think despite the fact that AI is still a relatively new concept in the world of recruitment, the application for AI is literally endless. I also think whilst the fundamentals of recruitment have been the same for decades, the industry itself has proven to be incredibly agile. I think it's evolving at an incredible pace. And I think in response to some of the challenges that we see in the world and the changes that we see in the industry, technology changes all the time as well. And I think something like the introduction of AI is an incredibly great example of how innovation can drive innovation. The fact that AI in itself is such a broad concept allows tech companies and tech pioneers, for example, to leverage AI in building new applications that can support recruiters in just about every element of their role, in my opinion. And I think in a relatively short space of time, and I'm talking about maybe the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen AI being applied to just about every area of recruitment, from creating job descriptions and job adverts to enhancing client and candidate communications, as well as things like candidate screening, candidate matching, programmatic advertising, which leverages AI to determine the most effective advertising channels based on things like role, location, and budget. The list is pretty endless. I'm going to give you some more examples just because I think, I know that you guys have been running a bit of a survey in terms of, seeing what your clients in the executive search space are doing with AI. And I think it's one of those industries where there's a whole bunch of features that are being leveraged by recruitment firms and talent acquisition leaders, for example. And I feel like from an industry point of view, Rectec probably, executive search probably makes up about 5% of the clients that we work with. So I wouldn't say that we have expert domain knowledge of what's going on in the exec search field, and that's I guess where your survey is going to come in really interesting in a bit. But in addition to things like candidate screening, candidate matching, programmatic advertising, there are things like chatbots, AI assistants that support both the client and candidate experience and improve engagement. Video interviewing tools, for example, where AI is being leveraged to great effect to better evaluate interview performance by analyzing candidate responses using things like NLP to assess candidate skills, personality, cultural fit, those kind of things. Automated scheduling is another one I've noted as well as something that we're seeing a lot more of. I think automated scheduling has been around for a long time. It's just come on leaps and bounds thanks to the introduction of AI, because we're now using AI to support, say, the scheduling of interviews by automatically identifying time slots that work for everybody. In the area of diversity inclusion, we're seeing tools that are leveraging AI to remove bias from the hiring process by anonymizing things like CVs or resumes for our audience today. But making, say, demographic information or masking demographic information and highlighting potential bias in job descriptions, that kind of stuff. Skill assessments, another one. We've seen lots of new and existing providers in the space leveraging AI to support the evaluation of candidates' technical skills through online tests and simulations that provide more accurate assessment of their abilities. And lastly, one of my favorites is these AI assistants that join great things like Zoom calls, and we use one internally every single day. I find myself on back-to-back Zoom calls all day, and typically I'm leaving one call and going straight onto the next. And I often wish I was in a position to have a PA. I don't, but an AI assistant has given me the ability to be able to very quickly summarize a call. It records the call, it shows me where things have been shared, it captures all of the actions automatically. All of that great stuff that's being introduced thanks to AI. Honestly, I'm just scratching the surface here. I know we're talking specifically about recruitment, but I think it highlights maybe the vast manner in which AI is affecting the recruitment tech industry. There's a number of new technologies out there that are being created as a direct result of the introduction of AI, as well as existing technologies that are being empowered by AI to provide more accurate, more efficient solutions that provide our industry with more value. What sort of things are you seeing, from an executive search perspective, what kind of feedback are you getting from your clients, Thaddeus?
Yeah, a lot of the things that we've been seeing executive search firms using AI for have fallen under those categories that you talked about, such as job description writing, research criteria, candidate profiles, automatic scheduling, video interviewing, chatbots, and AI assistants. Interestingly enough, transcription services and kind of those like fireflies type technologies out there that join the Zoom call and take notes throughout your entire conversation have blown up. I have been on so many Zoom calls with so many search firms where this little random little robot joins, and I have to admit this and approve this chatbot into the conversation. And as it takes notes, it's just incredible how much transcription has evolved in just the last 5-10 years, because it used to be really, really clumsy and really, really inefficient. But it's come leaps and bounds, and it helps search firms and even, business decision makers such as yourself to really focus in on the conversation. And especially from a search perspective, if you're interviewing high-level executive candidates, you need to be engaged, not worry about taking notes, that sort of thing. You need to be able to read the situation, read responses, pivot off of candidate responses, and also be able to understand, pick up on, and recognize nonverbals, body language, proxemics, all of those things. And these transcription technology tools driven by AI out there allow for search firms to be more involved and more present within that kind of interview space at the senior executive level. Now, another example that I've seen, and you kind of touched upon this, is search firms using ChatGPT, generative AI tools to draft job descriptions, position requirements, outreach emails, even writing marketing copy for their website. I'd say around 40% of search firms I've been speaking with are leveraging ChatGPT or generative AI tools in that way. And 40% is obviously not quite majority, but we're getting there, so it's come a long way, and people are starting to feel more comfortable bringing it into their process and bringing it into kind of the executive search level of recruitment. So kind of drafting job descriptions, reference checks, writing interview questions based upon position description, based upon a candidate's resume, and using that as kind of the foundation for AI to generate these talking points has also been an interesting way that search firms have leveraged it and really kind of brought it into their process. And another example of kind of that AI chatbot level assistance, administrative support type technology out there. I've seen search firms use AI in this way, but it's gone even a little bit deeper in terms of scheduling, automation, that sort of thing. Because as you know, you can kind of choose a tone or kind of ascribe personas to these types of technologies out there. So I've even seen search firms using AI in that kind of administrative assistant type of task-based work for scheduling, responding to candidates, that sort of thing. But ascribing a specific tone or ascribing a specific persona to that technology itself so that a candidate feels like they're speaking with a person. So it's really interesting how search specifically, which is a very, very niche market of the overall recruitment landscape, has decided to and found ways to implement AI, implement ChatGPT into their process in a way that is personalized and supportive, and not going to create necessarily more work on their end, create frustrations on the client or the candidate side of things. It's really interesting to kind of see how so far it has A, come, and B, worked its way into the search space. So thinking about that, and the ways that kind of executive search has adopted AI so far. And as you know, recruitment can be a little bit more of a laggard or slow to adopt industry. So it's interesting to see now that we're in 2023, AI has been around for a couple of years now, but now it's interesting to see, okay, this is here to stay. How can I leverage it to do better work, close searches faster, get create a more seamless, create a better candidate experience, create a better client experience for everyone involved, so that I'm able to more efficiently run my search process. So that being said, my question to you then is kind of what sort of specific technologies have you seen arise around kind of these different groups of AI, these different groupings of automation? Talk to me a little bit about, I'd love to hear about that, Rob.
Thanks. Yes, I think there's so much to think about when it comes to, new technologies that are coming to this space. It's such a broad question, and I think we could probably spend hours talking about this. You've mentioned ChatGPT a few times, and we're seeing that used massively across the recruitment and HR industry as well. And I think it's one of those things that even the technology vendors in this space are prioritizing on their roadmap. If they haven't integrated with ChatGPT already, they're doing it, and for the exact reasons that you mentioned before. Things like being able to magically change the tone of an email based on perhaps where the candidate is, or what the last engagement was, that kind of stuff. I love that. But some of the I think amazing advancements we've seen have been in the areas of things like candidate searching, for example, where traditional Boolean search. And I picked this one because a lot of executive search firms like to spend time perfecting their Boolean. But I think sometimes those techniques can be quite fiddly, quite cumbersome. And some of the new tools that we've seen to the market, like the amazing AI search builder platform we've seen from Tooled Up Raccoons, has provided a massive advancement over traditional Boolean searching. And it's introducing things like automatic Boolean construction, automatic job title variations, synonyms and related keywords, contextual suggestions, even search translations, which provides the ability to translate entire Boolean search strings into another language. So if you're sourcing for international talent, then you've got the ability to search CVs in the candidate's native language, and that can massively widen your net when it comes to sourcing. Other things we've seen around things like predictive analytics, which is another advancement we've seen recently that can analyze historical hiring data to predict which candidates are most likely to succeed in a role. This one I think was probably more designed, the next one I'm going to talk about was retention prediction, and that's more designed for I think employers and improving staff retention. But I can definitely see that there's an application here for recruiters as well. If you look at something like LinkedIn, for example, you mentioned it earlier. I know you said LinkedIn hasn't necessarily changed the game, but actually it's given us a platform on which we can hire more quickly. We can gain a lot of information, not just about individuals, but about companies. And one of those things that we can find out about companies is, their average tenure. How long does a person typically stay in a role with this organization? If I put myself in the shoes of an exec searcher and I'm looking for a particular type of candidate from a competitor company to maybe where they're currently working, I might be looking at things like the average tenure of people within that role, and I might look at the pool of talent available within that business, and I might use that as information that can help me hone in on candidates that might be more susceptible to new opportunities. If they've been there for 4.7 years and that's the average tenure, then maybe that's the time that I need to start engaging with these people with new opportunities. What sort of feedback have you seen from your clients, Thaddeus, in terms of new technologies that they're adopting?
Yeah, so in terms of the technology side of things, there's obviously a lot of players out there in the software space for recruiters, agencies, staffing agencies, that sort of thing. When it comes to executive search, it's a little bit more niche, and there's maybe just a handful of them. But even still, I've seen AI used in candidate sourcing, candidate scoring, making recommendations around candidates. But again, that sort of thing is, well, it's helpful. You still have to be able to provide feedback to kind of the automation and the AI tool itself in order to score and kind of, rank relevancy of, was this candidate relevant to the actual search and the results it actually produced that I prompted it to. So there's definitely been a lot of advancements and kind of focus around the candidate sourcing side of things. As you said earlier, search firms love Boolean search and Boolean search capabilities. So automatically recommending, building, generating Boolean search strings based upon position criteria, based upon job descriptions, based upon specific resumes as well. That's also been a way that I've seen AI kind of woven into the executive search level of software space out there. But the thing to be kind of not concerned about, but the thing to kind of think about when it comes to AI in general, not even just in an executive search space, is to think about, why was this application, why was this feature, why was this function developed? Was it reactive to kind of meet the demand, whatever that demand may be for the frenzy around AI and the frenzy around kind of automation and that sort of thing? Or was it specifically designed, built, and released and kind of made live within the platform based upon your actual use case and based upon your actual criteria and what value it brings to your executive search process? So even with tools out there that can generate Boolean strings, obviously it can still pull some terms, keywords that may not be totally relevant to the type of candidate that you're looking for, the type of candidates that you're looking to pull. So there obviously is still that human element of kind of an inference and influence, taking things out, adding things in that AI may have missed or kind of recommended that may not be as relevant to kind of generating the results that you're looking for. And even with job descriptions and Boolean search, like I said, AI is a great platform for generating and automating tasks and using it as a template. But again, at the end of the day, what you kind of ask and what you kind of prompt of AI and automation is it's going to give you kind of the result it expects you to want, essentially. That's really the end goal. So even so, if you're using AI to generate job descriptions, templates, marketing content, anything along those lines, there's still kind of that element of, cross your T's and dot your I's. Take a look at the work that has been produced, take a fine-tooth comb to what it actually has generated for you, and use that kind of human element of elimination and satisfaction and kind of review before kind of implementing it, sharing it, anything along those lines. The other thing I've been seeing, and kind of I've been thinking about this a lot the last couple of weeks before we started this webinar, Rob, and before we kind of even open it up for registration. I'm glad you brought up retention and predictive analytics. And as you said, obviously, it can be used in a number of different ways for staffing and recruiting firms out there. But from an executive search perspective, I think that there is extreme kind of power and opportunity behind just those two aspects of AI and executive search. First, for example, search firms are terrible at marketing. They are awful at it. And which is why probably some of them are using ChatGPT to generate some sort of marketing content, because they just don't have time for it. They just don't really understand how the process works and how to do it. But since search is such a referral and a repeat customer type of business as a professional service, I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing search firms using predictive analytics or using retention analytics in a similar way to start generating and leveraging within their business development process. So say, for example, a candidate leaves and starts a new role elsewhere. From a search side, there's opportunity in knowing that information and tracking that information twofold. First of all, it means there's a vacancy at your client company, which needs to be filled, or even as that candidate has moved on to a new role, to a new opportunity, there is opportunity for a search firm in building out the team around them. So having that understanding of retention analytics and having that insight into retention analytics can be very, very helpful from a business development, professional services, referral type of business. Now, on the flip side of that, predictive analytics, I think, could also be an interesting use and application specifically for executive search, based upon data for when a senior executive will either be potentially leaving a role, or when the need and the demand for a new role could be emerging within the business. So say, for example, using retention data to predict when a senior executive may be leaving. Say, for example, if you know how long a CFO typically stays in a role, it can be incredibly powerful to use that data and use that information for business development and strategic planning purposes to help start those BD conversations with your client and your stakeholders at just the right time before that kind of situation presents itself and kind of just before the senior executive departs that organization. Now, on the other side, predictive analytics, like we talked about a little bit earlier, you could go even deeper here and you can apply it to potential future leadership gaps. Say, for example, if you are a startup and a year, 2 years from now, if you've grown and scaled your business, statistically, a new type of leadership role will emerge in demand for that business and for that stage of where your business is at. So say, for example, startup, SaaS company, that sort of thing, a couple of years, once they've built up a very strong client base and a very loyal client base, what you want to do is keep them around. So there arises that need and that demand for kind of a head of success, head of training, head of kind of retention building strategies, that sort of thing. And so predictive analytics can be huge for search in this way to identify future leadership gaps, to identify future potential skills gaps across your entire organization based upon the data, based upon the type of clients, types of companies that you've worked with in the past. And you have access to all of that data because it's in your database. You've built this database with companies, people, placements, everything. So you have kind of that access and that insight. It's just really important to understand how can AI help support that process? How can AI use those data points in an efficient and effective way that brings value to the search process?
You've made some really good points. And I also, as you were talking, I only just really sort of thought about that correlation between ChatGPT and Boolean search, and that is that you only get out what you put in. I think the amount of applications I've seen for ChatGPT, and one of the reasons why I think a lot of organizations are kind of adopting this into their own tech solution, is that you do only get out what you put in. And I think sometimes I've seen organizations using this for even and I don't endorse this, by the way, but I've seen organizations using ChatGPT to create things like policy documents. And I'd always recommend that if you did something with ChatGPT and you created a policy document, whatever it might be, it could be could be a business policy, could be a policy document for HR, for legal, whatever. I'd always recommend obviously getting somebody qualified to review that document to kind of use it as kind of the basis on which you're forming that policy document as opposed to the end result. But if you don't know what you get out, you put more in, you educate. I think the more information you feed into ChatGPT, the better that response is. And I've seen some really, really good results. And I've seen the way in which I think the way in which some of those things are constructed are also really important as well. But I don't know why I went back to ChatGPT, because I was thinking about it as you was talking, and I was thinking, when I take myself back to my recruitment days and the amount of very complex Boolean searches that I would construct, it's very easy to kind of find yourself going around in a circle and not getting the results that you need. But actually, if the more information you give it, and I think the better you construct the input, the better the output's going to be. And I think that's true of many things, but
right. And the other thing to think about too is, like, not most, but some search firms have such a meticulous way, and some recruitment and staffing agencies have such a meticulous way of tracking and sorting and indexing candidates within their own database. So if that is the case of working within your environment, working within the platform, whatever it is that you work inside of, you have to take that into consideration when you're asking ChatGPT to generate Boolean strings, because it's taking information from public open spaces, essentially things that are available on the internet that you can pull from, or information that you give it specifically. So it's important to think about, even if you do have ChatGPT integrated into kind of your ATS or executive search software in some capacity for generating search results, keywords, anything along those lines, as a researcher, as a partner, as a business owner of the search firm, you still have to be able to kind of play with your own search results and play with and integrate kind of the way that you index your data, because there's only so much familiarity and so much kind of the ways ChatGPT can come up with solutions for Boolean search strings on top, and then kind of layering that on top of your own executive search process for how you source, how you organize, how you search, how you index candidates, people, projects, everything like that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I know at Clockwork, you guys work very closely with a number of search firms that you've also been conducting a comprehensive survey of the market with recently. What have you seen in terms of how search firms predict that AI will disrupt their process?
Yeah, so that's so we've been running a survey, and I think that some of you that are on this call today have already taken the survey, which thank you very much. So what we decided to do was run this kind of industry survey for executive search and AI automation, ChatGPT, because there really isn't a whole lot of information out there for AI and executive search specifically. So we decided to put together this survey to start gathering ideas, start really understanding, where in the search process does AI come in? Where do people need it? How do they want it to support their process? What elements and what stages of the executive search process, from research, sourcing, strategy, outreach, everything, can it fully replace, or should it fully replace, So we've been running the survey, and again, the survey is still open. In a couple of minutes, I'll throw up a couple of statistics and charts from the early results of that survey. But I just wanted to let you all know that we will be sending out the link to the survey after this webinar has concluded. So if you have not taken it, you are more than welcome to. We'll keep it open for another couple of weeks, probably until the end of September. And then what we plan on doing is publishing those results and handing it over to pretty much the industry, and providing this whole industry report around AI executive search and how search firms themselves expect to see it integrated into their process, and how they kind of see it supporting and see it changing the different stages of their executive search process throughout the entire life cycle of a search. And it's been interesting because we've seen a lot of responses around kind of that human inference place, which, so let me go ahead and share my screen so I can see. Sure.
Do love a good statistic. I'm looking forward to seeing these.
I know. So there we go. Can you see this chart right here?
Yes.
Perfect. Wonderful. So again, kind of the whole purpose and process of running this survey was to understand the executive search process and how AI is going to change that process, and how it's going to impact these different stages of the executive search process. So this chart that we're looking at here, green symbolizes not likely at all. AI has no chance in influencing that part of our process. Blue, somewhat likely, so the maybes, and then yellow is the very likely. So the yes, we can foresee it impacting our process in some capacity, in some format. So one of the first questions we asked our search firms was, based upon each stage of the executive search process, how likely do you feel the following phases of executive search are going to be impacted or changed by AI? And kind of where we're at today and what we've talked about up until this point, Rob, you can see research and sourcing over here on the left-hand side. Yellow is yes, AI will have an impact on the executive search space, specifically in this stage of the search process. And outreach is maybe to yes. So we're already kind of there in terms of generative AI, automated outreach, scheduling tasks, generating Boolean searches for filtering and searching and sourcing for candidates, that sort of thing, candidate outreach using AI, AI driven and AI kind of supported administrative assistance, that sort of thing. And then as we get through kind of the assessment phase, which I'm kind of under the assumption that that is the next stage of the search process where AI will continue to kind of creep into, if you will. And as you can see in these survey results, there's obviously the no bar and the yes bar. They're both kind of tied. And then there's the middle, there's the maybes. So these people in blue, they could go either way. They can be either like, no, AI will have no impact in the assessment phase of a candidate, that sort of thing. Or they could fall to the other side and say, absolutely, AI is going to change how we interview candidates, how we assess candidates, and how we recommend candidates move forward within the process. But as you can see, once we get to kind of more of those human intervention type stages, such as selection and decision, or even the strategy planning stages earlier on within the executive search process, that's where we kind of see pushback from search firms. So specifically for selection and decision, that stage focuses on obviously the final candidate recommendation, final candidate assessment, as you know. People were like, hands down, no way is AI going to change that part of our process at all. That's our special sauce. That's the value that we bring to the clients that we work with. And same goes for strategy. It's kind of still within that maybe to no place. But still the no's and kind of the naysayers still score higher than, yeah, potentially could impact that part of our search process. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got kind of the business and marketing development side of things, like I talked about earlier. And that sways more heavily towards, yes, very likely, because, that's a part of our process where a lot of balls are dropped, something along those lines. That's a part of the process that could definitely be automated and use AI in some capacity to drive more business and drive more leads based upon the data that I have as a search firm, the access to data that I have as a search firm, and that sort of thing. And same goes for kind of the pitch process as well. There's a big kind of maybe selection within that place in the whole executive search process as well. But what we're looking at here, like I've talked about, is your feedback, your insights of how AI and the expectation of AI impacting and affecting each one of these stages of your executive search process. Now, for example, sometimes some stages get mixed together, research and outreach, that sort of thing. But this overall is kind of the sentiment of where search firms are at with AI today and how it's going to impact or change this process. And one other thing I kind of was thinking about as I was looking at this just overarching data points and data set around the process of executive search and around AI and around automation, I was thinking about kind of, should or will ever AI be kind of a replacement for executive search or executive recruiting start to end? Could that ever happen? No.
Not in my opinion.
No, exactly.
And I love looking at stuff like this and looking at this from end to end. As you were describing that, I'm looking at this from a kind of technology point of view. And I'm thinking, actually, are those spikes in, where you've got the majority of people that actually are leveraging AI in, say, for example, sourcing and outreach and assessment and business development? That's where AI has become fairly mainstream of late, where you've got a lot of automation tools coming in there that I think are leveraging AI. Is where there's more awareness, I think. So where you've got more yellow, where you've got those where the peaks are in yellow, I think that's where there's more awareness of AI. And the bit in the middle, the kind of selection decision process, there's probably less tools around for the reason exactly what you got on the screen. Most people probably don't want AI to make decisions. They want AI to be more of an assistant, and your assistants don't typically make your key decisions about who you hire. It's typically it's down to a hiring manager to do that, not necessarily down to someone that's coordinating the process to decide who you hire. So I'm wondering whether actually the shape of this is very indicative of the technologies that are available in these stages and whether these will start to reshape. When you think about pitch process, there's a big blue spike there. Is that because there's a lack of technology available at that space, or is it because there's a, in that area, or maybe there's a lack of appetite for AI to play a part in that stage of the process? I'm quite surprised that business development, you've got such a sort of somewhat likely people to leverage AI in terms of business development, because I imagine there is so much potential for AI around business development and marketing. It's probably one of the areas where we've seen it the most.
Yeah. And even just kind of looking at this graph specifically and kind of going back to your point of, obviously AI will and can never replace the entire executive search function or entire recruitment function, start to finish, but it can support specific stages in various different ways, even in the selection and even in the strategy phases as well. And I like to think about it as kind of, automated driving, autonomous vehicles type thing. We've solved the entire process of driving, parking, everything end to end. So technically you don't need to drive yourself anywhere, but is it necessarily a full scale, full scope solution if you enjoy doing parts of driving? So say, for example, I don't mind driving. I enjoy it. I do. I hate parallel parking. So if there's a way that like automation AI can help support just that one piece of this process of driving that either I don't enjoy doing or I don't do it very well, I'd rather have that as kind of the tool to support my entire process rather than replace the entire thing end to end. So I think what we're seeing here, and what to your comment is, yes, we've seen kind of trends popping up for research and sourcing and potentially into the outreach stages. This is where we're at right now with a lot of this yellow. This is where we could head with business development and pitching and outreach and that sort of thing. And then these are kind of the further down the road, will never be replaced, but definitely could potentially be supported by AI.
Exactly.
And so within the survey, we start with kind of the overall assumption of, how likely do you feel the following phases of executive search, executive recruitment will be impacted by AI? And as we dove deeper into kind of the survey questions, what we did was we built specific kind of operational and automation questions around each one of these stages. So starting with marketing, business development, pitch process, strategy, research, outreach, assessment, selection, decision, close and grow your business, that sort of thing. So even with these two, strategy over here and selection and decision, which leaned more towards kind of the not likely at all to impact executive search process using AI and using automation, there was still some interesting statistics that came out of the questions within that section specifically. So for example, next grouping of questions, rate your level of interest in having automation or AI assist with the following strategy tasks. So now we're kind of talking about that strategy phase of executive recruitment, of executive search, where you sit down, you come up with the benchmark profiles, candidate briefing packs, position description, research criteria scorecard, all of that qualitative data, all of that qualitative information that you then use to put into effect in your research process. And we ask people, what parts of this process would you want support in? What parts of this process would be most beneficial to kind of drive the strategy phase forward and make it shortened in terms of timeline, in terms of overall closing your search. And it's interesting because even though at the very beginning, people were like, well, strategy AI never really is going to kind of impact it or influence the strategy. AI is never really going to influence the strategy phase of an executive search process because that's part of the human elements of what we do as a search firm. It's interesting to look at here, all of the yellows, and like, oh yeah, maybe it could help, in these different various ways of automation and that sort of thing. So for example, automatically suggesting words or phrases to attract specific gender types in position descriptions, automatically generating job descriptions. We touched upon that earlier. automatically suggesting compensation ranges based upon data that you have in your ATS, which is actual hard data. That I thought was interesting. Automatically suggesting target company lists, benchmark profiles, generate timelines, that sort of thing. So even though there was hesitation and kind of the assumption that AI would never influence or kind of impact the strategy phase of an executive search, because again, that requires a great deal of human intervention, kind of human collaboration. There's still a lot of areas for AI to kind of pick up the pieces and support that process to make it even better so that you work more closely and you work more strategically with your clients.
I think a lot of what we're seeing on the screen, and I'm seeing this for the first time, I think what we're seeing here is kind of already being very quickly becoming mainstream. We've seen so many new technologies, like I referred to earlier, coming into the recruitment industry, and I genuinely think that if you were to run this, at the rate at which AI is kind of evolving and being adopted, that rate of adoption is accelerating massively. I think if you ran this search in 12 months' time, it would look different. I think you'd probably still get the yellow spikes, but I think they would be taller, and I think the not interested at all would probably be smaller.
Right.
So I just think the more people, I think people are afraid of what they don't understand. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of people out there right now that don't necessarily understand AI fully. There's a lot of confusion between technology evolving and AI influencing that technology, and even and I have seen so many software vendors integrating with ChatGPT and saying we've got an AI tool. Right. You don't. You have a piece of technology that's integrated with an AI tool. You don't provide a piece of AI software. Yeah. So there's a lot of there's a lot of confusion about what qualifies as AI and what doesn't, and I think in order to understand that, you've got to really go back and say, actually, where's the data coming from? What actually makes this? What qualifies this as an AI platform? And there's also you may know more about this because it's more prevalent in the US than it is here in the UK, but there's legislation coming in around AI and the use of AI, and whether AI is being used to make some of these decisions that may potentially introduce bias, for example. And it's getting pretty serious. I mean, I spoke to somebody a few weeks back that's just taken an entire certification in this area so that they can support a local government initiative to to better kind of manage this issue as it's unfolding. It's a challenge in the industry for sure.
And even with just the generative aspects of AI, there are disclaimers that people need to kind of put out there to say that, this blog, this research criteria, this position briefing was generated by AI in order to kind of protect themselves, within the space. Because again, AI, generative AI specifically, pulls from a lot of different sources and a lot of different information. So there's a couple of different risks you have to assess for. It's either misinformation. That's always a possibility of happening on the internet, believe it or not. And then there's also the side of copyright protection and kind of internal information that shouldn't necessarily be out there, but sometimes it is. So there's a lot of kind of protections and disclaimers that people still haven't necessarily sorted out or figured out how to work through or figured out how to mitigate even. And I think that is interesting coming out of where we are now and where we are headed for executive recruitment, executive search, and just AI in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very much a kind of watch this space and see how things unfold. But I definitely think the survey results are really interesting, and I think I'd be really interested to do this again in 12 months and see the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left, and you and I have talked, and you and I can go hours talking about AI. I know this about both of us. But I wanted to get to a couple of questions from our Q&A and everyone that's listening and watching. One question coming off of that security question is, how are firms addressing the security concerns when it comes to recording interviews or sensitive information, using tools, using transcription tools, and kind of storing that information? What sort of things are you seeing out there from a security side when it comes to recording or kind of transcribing those conversations.
It's interesting, isn't it? And this kind of goes back to, those AI assistants that we were talking about earlier. And I use one every single day. And I only started adopting that about maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And it's really, it's a big time saver. And I hadn't really thought about this until you were saying it earlier, but the amount of times, and I always have a notebook. I'm very traditional. Like I remember things when I write things down.
Yeah,
So
same.
I always find myself, when I'm in the middle of a meeting, I'm listening to what's going on, I'm talking, but I'm often looking at a notepad and I'm often making notes because that's how it helps me to remember. When I started using this AI assistant, I didn't really need to make notes anymore because all of that was happening automatically, and it allowed me to focus more on actually the conversation. I'm probably 20% more involved in the conversation now than I was before because being a man, I'm not particularly great at multitasking. But I think one of those concerns that I had, when I first started using this, it's automatically joining every meeting, and it's automatically recording that meeting, and it's telling people when they join that they're being recorded. And it did get me thinking, to the point where I ran a poll on this, and I wasn't planning to talk about this, so I don't have the results in front of me, but I've got a reasonably good memory. I decided I was going to run a poll with my network on LinkedIn to say, actually, when a call is recorded, like if you join a video meeting and that call's being recorded, does it impact your participation? And I think something like 85% of people said it doesn't impact them at all. And there were only 3 options. It was, does it impact it? No, not at all. Might impact their participation, or they won't join a meeting if it's being recorded. And I think it was something like 3 or 4% said they wouldn't join the meeting if it was being recorded. And about 10 or 12% said that it would impact their participation in some way if they were being recorded. So I'm sort of straying off from the security element a little bit, but I think it's important to also, as people are, as AI is more and more adopted or becoming more adopted, I think it's important for people to become more accepting of it as well. From a security point of view, I don't think we're seeing a great deal of this in the UK yet. And I typically see kind of the UK, when it comes to technology, as kind of leading the way. I think everybody, and I know we're kind of talking to a US audience right now, but from generally speaking, from working with clients in both the UK and the US and Canada, most people typically agree that technology is probably more advanced in the UK than it is in North America. That's been the case for a long time. But I think when it comes to this particular subject around security in AI, and I've got to say, I've only really seen a positive response coming from the US right now. And that's from some recent conversations I've had where, I know that there are legislative changes coming over there that haven't yet made it over here. So I'm not sure about, being completely honest, I'm not sure about how the industry is going to respond from a security point of view, but I think it's definitely going to become something that is governed in the same way how the UK introduced GDPR to protect people's data privacy. I think we're going to see something similar, a similar legislation to GDPR, but specifically around the use of AI as a technology in not just in recruitment, in business.
Yeah, and definitely that's a good point that you made around kind of Europe and the US, and not necessarily US but North American technology market. Like GDPR came first back in the late 20 teens, followed by CCPA, which is the California Protection Act against data privacy and that sort of thing. And I think that was kind of the starting point for compliance, security, everything. And I think that will continue to grow and kind of reach into these areas of AI, transcription, recording parts of conversations, that sort of thing. And then new legislation, I think, will kind of pop up around that. But it's important to understand kind of consent when you're speaking with somebody and asking for it, and letting them know that they're being recorded. By the way, this webinar today is being recorded. But yeah, I think it's a lot about kind of informed consent and people being comfortable and being able to kind of opt into it themselves instead of just kind of pushing it on them. And even like you said, with some of those transcription tools out there that do join Zoom, do join virtual interviews and calls, that sort of thing. If somebody says no, you always have the ability to just be like, okay, turn it off, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not an all or nothing situation, but you do have to be considerate of everyone's personal preferences, how this data is going to be used, how it's going to be securely stored in their executive search software, on their own server, something along those lines. There's always those considerations when it comes to security. And I think that GDPR, CCPA, data privacy laws in general across the globe are going to kind of start encompassing those assets when it comes to data privacy. We probably have time for one more question. This question is related to benchmarking. And she says she would love to hear any suggestions, tools, platforms, Rob, you have for kind of executive benchmarking or just benchmarking candidates in general within kind of that strategy, research, sourcing stage of the recruitment process. Have you seen any tools out there or platforms out there that do benchmarking really well?
I mean, I'm certain there are. In my day-to-day role, there's not one thing that's coming to mind, to be honest. And you know, Rectec as a business have a marketplace of complementary technologies. We don't have any benchmarking tools in there right now. Maybe it's something we need to look at. We don't even have a category for benchmarking, actually. But it's definitely something that I think is probably worth maybe getting some extra help on. Like, I don't think I'm your man for that.
Right.
I'd like to say yes, but you know, day to day, our clients don't typically leverage benchmarking tools, and if they do, they don't tell us about it.
Yeah. And the same is true for executive search too. I think that benchmarking sits within that strategy phase of the search process, which people are sort of kind of becoming more open to with AI intervention and that sort of thing. So while it's not there yet, and there probably was, you know, one of the reasons why there was more green and blue on that chart specifically versus the research and the outsourcing stage, I wouldn't be surprised if you see benchmarking even beyond kind of recommended candidates that you should be putting on your search or should be putting on your project, going a step further before you even get to that research process and saying, okay, if we could generate this ideal executive, which is the whole benchmarking process, what would that look like? And I think that that would be an interesting and a very curious kind of addition to the strategy phase of the overall executive search and recruitment process as well. So I think it falls within that, you know, coming soon bucket of technology and that sort of thing.
I saw there were a couple of questions in the chat around the tool that I mentioned earlier for automating Boolean searching. I am going to just so we don't leave anybody hanging, I'm just going to pop the website into the chat there. Hopefully everybody can see that. The tool is called Tooled Up Raccoons. It's a weird one, isn't it? But you know, each to their own. It's a great tool. The owners are a fantastic pair as well, and they have a lot of experience in this space, and the tool is incredibly innovative. So if you do want to check it out, the website's right there in the chat.
Absolutely perfect for that. All right, so we are at time, and there's still a handful of questions left within the Q&A. If we did not get to your question today, either myself or Rob will follow up with you to answer kind of some of the other questions around specific tools, products available out there. But I wanted to say thank you, Rob, so much for joining me today. This has been one of the more fun kickoff webinars that I've been able to run and kind of host and lead in the discussion around AI and technology. So thank you so much for joining me. Again, this is Rob Green, CEO of Rectec, and we'll send out a recording of this webinar after it concludes today. And anyone that registered for this webinar specifically and attended the webinar, if you're interested in looking at Clockwork's executive search software, as a thank you for attending today, you get 10% off your first annual fee of dues. So that's another thing to kind of think about in the overarching AI executive search conversation that we've been having today. So again, if we didn't get to your question, we'll be in touch. The recording is available, and we'll also send out the survey link as well in order for you to continue to provide your input, continue to provide your insights as to where AI is headed and how it's going to impact and exchange the executive search and recruitment space. Again, I'm Thaddeus with Clockwork. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Rob, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's
I popped
been
my
a really great
LinkedIn.
conversation.
I popped my LinkedIn in the chat as well. If anybody wants to connect, if they've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'd love to help.
Perfect. Awesome.
Thanks so much.
All right. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Starts now.